Okay. So, okay. So, yesterday we were looking at Sif Chaf Aleph as far as um, the halacha, as far as when are you allowed to quit, when are you not allowed to quit. Um, that even if you received payment in advance, you're allowed to quit your job in the middle, provided that there's no financial loss that you're causing to the employer. Okay, and similarly, good morning. Similarly, an employer is allowed to fire at will, provided that he doesn't cause financial loss to the employee, because there's plenty of work available. So that's what we had seen so far yesterday. Okay. So there are a couple of, maybe we should just probably um, take a look at some of just finish the Imrei Yaakov first, and then we can go back. So it doesn't make a difference bein b'schirus lizman bein b'kablanus. It makes no difference whether it was the person as a socher hired by the hour or the day, or whether he's hired for the job. Even if he was paid in advance, he's allowed to quit his job in the middle. And he says, Ayin biurim de divrei harav kan sarachian. He says, the words of the Rav Shulchan Aruch are not so clear. The das haposkim hu the davka poel shehu sachir yom yachol lachzor bo, ma'shein kin kablan ayin sham. He says, in the biurim we clarify that the majority of poskim explain that only a sachir, is allowed to quit a job in the middle, because he can say, just pay me for the work I've done, and you'll find somebody else. But if a person hires a kablan to fix to make him a chair, or to build him something, or to clean a garment, or whatever it is, you can't interrupt in the middle and say, I'm finished. So that's the first thing. And then he says, as far as whether a worker, when we say that a worker can quit even midday, is a machlokus in the poskim, what you should do if they both made a kinyan. If the kinyan was made on the work, if there was a contract, do we also make the same allowance for a worker to quit in the middle of the day? The das haritva b'shem rabota. Oh, I'm sorry. Hold on 1 second. He says, the das haritva b'shem rabosav shalo amru shapoel yacholach sobo ela b'maskir atzmo ba'amira bilvad. Because according to the Ritva, we only say that a worker is allowed to quit his job when there was only an oral agreement. Aval im nishtabed b'kinyan b'tfuye asa shelo yuchzor lachzor bo. But according to the Ritva, if there was some kind of kinyan made, if there was a formal contract entered into, the reason for the formal contract, the service contract, was in order to prevent the worker from being able to quit in the middle of the work period. The Rivash, however, says that in all situations, a sachir is allowed to quit in the middle. And that's the opinion of the shach. Od nechlaku haposkim b'haidina dahacha depol yachol lachso be'emtza hazman. He says another machlokes in the poskim, when in referring to a worker allowed to quit in the middle of the day, is this also the case if his reason for quitting is because he wants to work for somebody else? Because some say that that's perfectly fine. If you want to quit your job so that you can go work for somebody else, then you have a right to do so. The argument being is that there's no indebtedness. That, in other words, like the principle that the Rav Shulchan Aruch says, there's no such thing as indentured servitude. So there's a principle in halacha of quit at will. That's the argument. So if I can quit at will because I can never be indentured to you, so then it doesn't make a difference what my reason for quitting my job is, even if I just want to go work for somebody else instead of working for you because he's offering me a better job, he's offering me better pay, whatever it is, that's fine. So therefore, it doesn't matter that he's quitting this job to go to another job. But there are those who disagree, and they say that it's only if he quits without giving a reason, because we then assume that he just doesn't want to work anymore. He's got enough money, he's content, and he just wants to take it easy. But if his reason for quitting is because he wants to go work for somebody else, then he doesn't have a right to quit midday or midweek or midterm, whatever that term is. And regardless, he's at a disadvantage, meaning that he may not be entitled to full payment of the time that he's put into it. Yeah. Sachir is working by the day, the hour, the week. Kablan works by the job. Like a classic Kablan would be a dry cleaner. You bring him your suit to clean. So he's being paid for the job of cleaning your suit. He's not being paid by how long it took him to. Yeah. Right. Right. So this is what he started with. He started with the idea that according to the Rav Shulchan Aruch, it doesn't make a difference. You can quit at any time. Just give the guy whatever materials he gave you and say, I'm sorry, I wasn't able to do it. Here's your stuff back. But there are other poskim who disagree. And we'll take a look in the Biurim, and we'll see this perhaps a little bit later. In the Biurim, he clarifies that there are many poskim who say that only if you're a sachir, only if you're working for a term, you're allowed to quit in midterm. But if you're working by the job, you do not have a right to quit in the middle of the job. Okay. That the Ramah says, and maybe we'll take a look at that inside, that if a person quits because he wants to make more money, then we don't listen to him. Uladina tzarech iyun, and as a practical matter, this requires more analysis. And he also refers us to the Chazon Ish in Bava Kama Siman Chaf Gimel. Okay, let's take a look at that Ramah for just a second. Shin Lamed Gimel Sif Dal. We should probably take a look at the original source. doing? Okay. Okay, this whole sif is hasocher es hapoel, uba hapoel lachzer kodem shehischel, o acher kain. That if a person hires a worker and the worker would like to quit either before he begins the job or after he began the job. So, sorry, let me share my screen with you. There we go. Hischil hapol b'malacha v'chazer bo b'chatzi hayom chozer. That if a worker started his work and then he quits even midday, he has that right. Va'afilu kibel kfar demei sechirus ve'ein biyadu l'shalom bal habayis yachol lachzer bo v'hamos chov alav. And even if he's received payment in advance for the work that he committed to do, he can still quit. And if he's already spent that money, he just owes the money to the employer. Shenemar ki li b'nei Yisrael avadim v'lo avadim la'avadim. And it's based on the principle that we saw in the Rav Shulchan Aruch that you're not an indentured servant. Umehai taima, and the Ramah adds that for this reason, Asr lepol afilu melamed osofer lahaskir atzma lios bebeis balabayis bekeva shlosh shoshanim. That it's for that reason that you shouldn't hire yourself out for more than 3 years at a time, which we said we would come back to that idea, right? Because that's what we saw in the Rav Shulchan Aruch. So in Sif Daled, he says, Ketzad, din hapol shechaza bo acher shehitchil. So how does it work? If he already started the work and then he quits. Shamin lo masha asa v'notel. We evaluate the work product that he's done up until now, and he's entitled to compensation for that, whether it's work by the hour or the amount of work that he's put into a product. Bein hukra hamalacha uhuzla, regardless of whether let's say the output, maybe the prices have changed in the interim. The davka shechazer stam avalim chazer mikol chioker ein shomin lo. He says, let's say in other words, let me just see what the commentaries say over here. So here, the Bear Haytape says like this. He says, Kugon, shesachro beches jinrin liyom. Let's say I hired the guy for 8 dinars a day. Ve'asa imo chatzi hayom. And I hired him for the day, but he only worked for half the day. Vafilu nisyakra shetzarach litein la'acher mechatzi yom hanishar vav dinarim. Afilu hachi tzarach litein l'rishon daled dinarim mechatzi yom sha'asa. He says, let's say I hired you a week ago and I told you, okay, come to my place next week and you'll work for me for 8 dinars a day. That was the negotiated price. The guy agreed, started working, and then someone whispers in his ear, most guys are getting 12 dinars a day for this job. So the guy quits in the middle of the day and he says, okay, give me 6 dinars. The employer can say to him, no, we negotiated 8 dinars a day. You worked half a day, you get 4 dinars. The guy says, well, other people are getting 12. Doesn't matter. You and I negotiated 8 dinars. That's what you're getting paid for this work because that was what we contracted for. Now, that's the point that is being made, that regardless of whether the work price has gone up or down, whatever was negotiated is what the guy's entitled for compensation on a prorated basis. Okay? And that's what the Ramah means when he says, Aval im chazar mikoch yoker ein shomin lo, that if the guy quits because he discovers that he can get more money elsewhere, then we don't listen to him. In other words, the guy can't say, he shows up at the work and he says, even though I told you I'd work for you for 8 dinars a day, I've decided I'm entitled to 12 dinars a day. No, what are you talking about? You contracted for 8. So a person does not have a right halachically to quit the job in the middle of the day if it's because of a dispute over wages. He has to finish the day and get paid what he contracted for. Then he doesn't have to come back tomorrow. He can quit at that point, because if the contract period was per day, so then you want to quit at the end of the day, fine. But we don't allow you to quit in the middle of the day just because you don't feel you're getting paid enough. That's what you agreed to. The inkablan hu shaman lo es sha'asid la'asos. And if the person is a kablan, let's say he was hired to build a chair, and he built half the chair so far. Let's say he put together the wood, but it still has to be finished and stained and lacquered and things and upholstered, let's say. Okay, so we evaluate how much it would cost to finish the job. And then we subtract that from the full price of what he was charging, and that's what we pay him. So let's say he was charging $100 to build the chair, an upholstered chair, and he finished the wood part, but he quits and says, I'm sorry, I can't finish this. You'll have to take it to another upholsterer. And the other guy is going to charge me $60. The guy is only entitled to $40 because we contracted to get $100. I'm going to have to pay another $60 to get it upholstered, so you only get $40.
But if there was a situation where the new upholsterer said, I just can't complete this work, I just have to start from the beginning because it's not done shoddily and I can't build upon this. Is there a situation where the first person doesn't get paid anything?
Possibly. I don't know. We'll have to take a look. Remember, the Imrei Yaakov tells us that in the Biurim, he's going to clarify that according to many poskim, a kabbalan is never allowed to quit in the middle of the job.
Right.
Obviously, unless there's an onus of some kind. Okay. Now, so that's really what the Imrei Yaakov was referring to when he says, just to go back to what we were studying. He says, the imchozer machmas yoker ein shomen lo, that if the worker wants to quit because the price of workmanship has gone up, you don't listen to him. Uladina tzarachian, and it requires further analysis. He then brings in the footnote. Obviously, there's going to be a lot of permutations here. If you look at Kufayin Ches down here in the Shar Hatzion, where he lists his references, the Imrot Selachzer Bo Machma Shabalabai Zek Kashalo, the Hasheni Noachlo. Let's say he wants to quit, not because of better pay, not because of any other reason, but he wants to go work for somebody else because that person's easier to work for, which can happen a lot of times. He doesn't like being barked at. He doesn't like the work environment at the first place. He wants to go work for the second place. He's going to be making the same amount of money. So that's not so simple. He says, Re'e minchas pitim simin shin lamed gimel sif daled. So I'll have to take a look at that sefer and let you know what he says. And we'll take a look at Mirz Hashem at the Chazon Ish as well. Okay. So there's a lot of permutations here, a lot of fine tuning that we have to get to as far as when a person is allowed to quit at will and when he's not. And we said even if kibel kvar kol secharo, as we saw in the Shulchan Aruch just a moment ago, va'af im ein biyado l'shalim l'bal habayis, even if the worker received all, let's say for the day that he was hired to work for 8 dinars, the balabayas gave him the 8 dinars in advance, and the guy then spent it over the weekend. And he comes to work and he only works half the day. So he quits in the middle of the day. Balabaya says, but you only put in 4 dinars of work in. Give me back four dinars. So the guy says, I don't have it. So Yachol Lachzerbo, he still has a right to quit. The Hamos, Chovalav, then and he owes the money. There's a debt generated. But the fact that he doesn't have the money in hand is not enough of a reason to require him to continue working. He can just say, okay, I'll owe you the money. Right? And this is only true when he currently doesn't have the money. We say that, okay, you'll owe the employer the money. But if he's never going to have the opportunity to pay him back, let's say he's become, I don't know, he says, let's say he's going to be leaving town. I'm never going to see the guy again. So then a person doesn't have a right to quit if he doesn't have the ability to ever pay him back. Okay, so then you would not be allowed to quit. Then you'd have to figure out how to finish the day's work, because the only time we allow you to quit is in midday or mid-job is when you're not causing the balabayas financial loss, right? And that's of course a very big proviso. However, the language of the Shulchan Aruch implies that an employee can never be forced to finish working. In other words, regardless of what the service contract is, regardless of what the arrangement that was made was, a person should never feel that he's indentured to another person, so he can quit at will. This is a controversy. I learned this many years ago. A service contract where a person is employed, like let's say I have a service contract, for a certain number of years to work for the synagogue. What are my legal obligations and what are my legal rights if I wanted to terminate that contract in the middle? So every lawyer I've ever spoken to says that you can still quit at will because service contracts are for the benefit of the employee, not for the benefit of the employer. In other words, it provides the employee, peace of mind that I cannot be fired at will if, let's say, the board is not happy with me, unless there's cause for termination. That's, of course, a clause in the contract, right? Moral turpitude, or all of these other things, right? But if there's no cause for termination, the contract entitles me to continue working, or at least to buy out my contract. But what if I want to quit? What if I want to make aliyah and I've had enough, right? Can't take this job anymore, right? So no, it's not true. Very happy here, but let's say in theory, right? So then the halacha would be based on what we're seeing, that even with a service contract, even though the Rav Stern had just told us that when a kinyan is made, it's not so clear that an employee has a right to quit at will, but the Rav Shulchan Aruch is saying that it doesn't make a difference, and an employee can quit at will. So this is a gray area, but everyone I've ever spoken to, every labor lawyer I've ever spoken to has told me that no employer can enforce a contract to compel someone to continue working for them. Okay, so it could be based on this, but okay. Now, again, The only time that an employee has a right to quit at will, or an employer has a right to fire at will, is if it's a very, very opportune job market. The employee can always tell the boss when he quits, you can always find somebody else. There's no interruption to your productivity and so forth. And similarly, the employer can tell the employee, you're not losing anything because companies are desperate for workers in this particular industry. So you won't have any problem finding another job. Therefore, either side can terminate at will. That's the basis of this halacha. However, that's only true if you're not causing a financial loss. Aval, and this is the next piece in the Imrei Yaakov. Aval im gorim hefsid, asur lachzor. But if you are causing financial loss, then you're not allowed to quit. And even if by quitting, you're not causing financial loss, you're just preventing him from profiting, then it's also prohibited. And therefore, if it's anticipated that if the guy quits suddenly, he's going to cause financial loss to his employer, he has to give advance notice such that there won't be any interruption in the productivity. So that's why every industry has a different standard as far as how much advance notice has to be given. Sometimes it's 14 days, sometimes it's 30 days, sometimes it's 6 weeks. It all depends on how likely the employer is to find someone to take over that job and how long it'll take to train them, etc.
What was it about that one back about the contract? Often in the service contracts too, there might be some sort of clause or something that you cannot work in for there's valuable information of that company.
Right, and so there's a non-competition clause and
right?
a non-disclosure clause. Yeah.
Right. So if they're allowed to just quit and then go to a competitor and take this, what's the purpose of having that contract really? And for that particular clause, anyways.
Right. So a non-competition clause can be upheld. We haven't seen anything like that in the halacha yet, as far as what the rights of an employer are when he trains an employee and provides them with certain trade secrets, what the obligation of the employee as far as working for somebody else is. That part we haven't seen yet. Okay. So the employee has to give advance notice if it's going to take time to replace him. V'chein lahefech, habal habayis sherotze lepatro, tzarich lahodio, berosh sheyuchal lechapes avoda lefi ro's einei hadayan. And similarly, if an employer needs to release an employee, he has to give him advance notice and say, I'm terminating you, but you have 2 weeks, or I terminate you with 2 weeks pay, or something to that effect. Now, sometimes the guy can continue working to finish whatever projects he's been working on. And sometimes because of sensitive issues, they'll walk the guy off the premises and say, clear out your desk, right? But you still would have to pay the person a certain number of days until they can get back on their feet and find other work. And that also has to be evaluated by the Beis Din, right? The Beis Din could do their research, and based on their investigation, would say what is a fair amount of time that we should give this fellow to find a new job in this particular job market. And if there's a custom that's already accepted in a particular industry of giving a person 2 weeks or 30 days or whatever it is, you go according to the established minhag. Okay? All right, so this is a good place to hold it. We have a lot more material to cover. This halacha is very rich in content. There's a lot of different permutations as far as when a person can quit, and when an employer can terminate an employee. Okay, so
Shkoyach.